So, welcome back to the Connecting Europe tour. We're here with Tony Cass in the CERN data center. How are you doing today, Tony?
Fine, thanks. Good to be with you.
Could you give us a little overview of your role?
Okay, so I lead the communication systems group in the IT, the information technology department. So we're responsible for all of the networking across site, connecting CERN to the outside world, and we're also responsible for all the telephony services. So the ordinary fixed phones that you'd use, our mobile phone service, and we have a digital radio as well for the fire brigade that covers the huge campus that we've got here.
Okay, and so that is one of the potential challenges and interesting things about having a campus, that it covers borders or crosses borders and goes across. Is it 4 main experiments?
Yeah, so there are 4 main experiments around the LHC Collider, but the thing you mentioned, the border, for mobile telephony, that is a really big problem, because most borders, the mobile telephony service imagines that you drive across it at high speed, whereas we sort of go along it, so that's a very different problem for the telephony. But for the networking, it's not a problem. We have a big fibre infrastructure that connects here, the data centre, to all of the experiments, 15, 20 kilometres away. That's not really an issue for us there, but for telephony, the border really is.
Looking back from, you've been working for CERN for a long time, looking back at the way that data used to be handled to how it is now, could you maybe give us an overview of some major changes in technologies?
Okay, so probably the biggest one compared to when I was a physicist here is really the way in which networks have taken over and have developed over the past 20, 30 years. So when I was a student, I literally carried magnetic tapes that you see in films, the reels, back to my university with the data. From the mid-90s, it was easy to send the data, but even when around the turn of the century, 2001, 2002, when we were planning for the LHC, people still imagined that we might need to send tapes or cassettes by plane to send the data to our collaborators around the world. And people thought that the network would be the weakest link of the triad that we need, the compute servers, the storage servers, and the network. In fact, it's been completely the opposite. The network has been the most reliable part of those 3. And the growth in network over the past 25 years has really revolutionized the way in which we work. The LHC model had a hierarchical thing where you would send data out from CERN to centers that would share responsibility for storing on tape. There's around 10 of those to around 150 tier 2 centers that would do the processing. Now it's a free-for-all. The data can be stored anywhere, anyone can access it anywhere, and NRENs like Géant and others have enabled that to happen by providing the infrastructure, the connectivity, the increase in bandwidth to support the data transfers that we need. And this is what we imagine for the future. We really don't see that the network will be a problem because of the relationship we have with Géant, ESNet and others in planning for the big increase in data that we'll see with HLHC from 2028.
Could you talk a little bit more about that? What sort of data increase and what is the project that's going to create that data?
Okay, so at the moment we're in what's called Run 3 of the Large Hadron Collider. And in 2026, 2027 there'll be a major upgrade to the high luminosity Large Hadron Collider. So that will increase the number of collisions by at least a factor of 10. And at the same time, the experiments are going to increase the sensitivity of their detectors to include even more data. So the factor of data that we'll take could be 10, could be 100 times more. We'll be limited in the end by how much money we've got to store the data on tape or to be able to process it. But it's at least a factor of 10, possibly a factor of 100 more data that we'll be expecting from 2029.
And are there physical infrastructure developments that will be required to enable this?
Sure. I mean, the volume of storage that we need, you saw the tape robots that we had, we need more of those because we have to keep storing the data long term. We need more data on disk and we need more processing capacity. Networking will also need more networking, but that will mean more physical machines because the network speeds will increase. Today, we're mostly at 100 gig. We've got some 400 gig connections. 800 gig is coming online. Then we'll expect 800 gig internationally to be standard, if not the past. So there, the number of boxes for the networking won't increase, but for other things, we will need to increase the storage. And we, in fact, we've just recently created a new data center on our Prevessin site to do that.
Tony, how do you manage the complex infrastructure required to oversee this operation?
Okay, so automation, automation, and automation. I mean, that really is it. A lot of companies can choose which network provider they will use, and they will go with that vendor and they will manage that equipment. We can't do that. As a publicly funded organisation, we have to go out to tender, and we have a range of different network equipment from different suppliers, and we have to make sure that the way that we manage those is the same, not the management tools of all the different vendors. So that we just really automate everything. We have a single point of truth in a database that knows how all of our network switches and network routers should be configured. If there's any problem, it's very simple for somebody who knows nothing about networking like me to pull a switch out, put a new one in, and then the automation software that we have will reconfigure that, and everything will be fine. You know, people talk about software-defined networking. We've been doing that since the 90s to ensure that we have the level of automation that enables us to operate not just the data center that you see here, but also the campus connections that we have that support over 10,000 users each day on site. You know, that again is a very big network that we have to manage with the Wi-Fi services and with all the different things that we provide. So it's automation.
With this exponential increase in data that we're seeing from future experiments, is there a way, or are you potentially thinking about using AI to help process that data and understand it better?
In the IT department, some of us are, but processing the data is actually the responsibility of the different collaborations. So the Atlas and CMS, Alice, LHCb, they are the people who are responsible for processing their data, and they're certainly looking at AI for analysing that. We're looking at AI for managing some tools, but it's not at the level of really the sense of managing the physics data. So
we were talking about the Géant network. Can you elaborate on your collaboration and partnership with the Géant network?
Okay, so that really goes back a long, long time. You know, I said back in the 80s, 90s, people moved tapes around, and CERN was very much involved in developing European network in the 90s. And that led to Dante, who supported network services, and Terrena, which was an association of academic institutions using the network. And then they merged to form the Géant organization that supported what was called the Géant network. So we've been involved really with Géant for 30 years now. How do they help us? Well, you know, I mentioned this system before where the data starts out at CERN, the tier 0. Then we have dedicated connections that go to the tier 1s that support tape storage. And some of those in Europe, those interconnections go across the Géant network. And then after that, there's around 150 tier 2 sites that also need to connect to that data. And Géant has helped with ESNet and others to develop what we call the LHC1, a special network environment. It's basically a layer 3 virtual overlay on all of the national and international academic networks that enables the data to be transferred effectively between the high energy physics sites. Because if you have firewalls in place, you know, they can't cope with the data rates that we need to have. So the LHC1 network enables the transfers to bypass the firewalls and provide the high-speed interconnects that we need between the sites to support the data transfers.
Are there any potential data security concerns by bypassing firewalls, or just in CERN and the data center itself?
There are security concerns, but that's again the point with working closely with Géant. We work with them to worry about those security implications, and we just recently had a discussion at a LHC1 collaboration meeting in Catania where people from Géant were present, and we discussed what we need to do to make sure that these transfers are secure. Data security is really a big problem. Cybersecurity is a problem that we have to work with that. And also, you know, CERN, like many organizations, is continuously under cyber attack. Denial of service attacks and so on. We had one recently, and there Géant can help us to counter these denial of service attacks. So, you know, Géant does help in that area as well.
Can you explain what happens in that sort of situation?
Well, it depends on really the nature of the attack, but you know, in general, we have to block any packets coming from malicious nodes, and if they're spread around the place, you have to identify them, and that's what Géant helps to filter them out before they reach CERN.
Fantastic. Okay, maybe we can move on to some more like light-hearted questions, if that's okay. What's your favorite thing about your job?
That it's different every day. And that I'm working with a bunch of really smart people that make everything easy for me. I have some sort of ideas, and then they make it happen. It's just really working with people, working with at the cutting edge of science. It's great.
That's a definite theme that I've felt through our short time at CERN today. Just the feeling of sort of excellence and collaboration, and really working towards a bigger and better future, discovery. Could you maybe go into detail about some projects you're currently working on, or maybe a project that's coming up that you're very excited about?
Okay, so project that I'm working on at the moment is reworking the way that we manage access to our Wi-Fi network. We were very early adopters of Wi-Fi, and back in the day, you had to identify by the MAC address that people have the device and register that. Nowadays, people don't know what the MAC address is. They're much more used to logging into Wi-Fi networks with user ID and passwords, and we're transitioning to that. And I see that in the longer term, that will help us to manage the campus network as a unified wired and wireless network, simplifying life for our users, making it easier for them to connect. So, building on services, making it easier for users to access the network, I think is the nub of the project, really. And that's, again, the challenge, making things easy for users, making access to data simple.
How many regular users do we have?
Regular users, so as I say, people on site, I think there is, COVID it's maybe not as much, but it's around 8,000 to 10,000 people on site, physicists, CERN staff, contract staff, and so on. But that's not the number of devices that people have. We have many people have a phone and a laptop on Wi-Fi, so the number of devices that we have is easily 10,000 and above each day.
Could you tell us a little bit about what made you want to get involved at CERN?
Okay, so I was studying maths and physics, and it was probably SLAC, and the status of the standard model now is really well understood. Back in the 70s, when I was doing physics at school, it wasn't, and SLAC was doing wonderful things, and quarks had just been discovered when Feynman and so on. So that was really what happened. And then what's interesting, I think CERN was very much in the background of SLAC in the 70s, and then CERN took the radical decision to rework its SPS collider, its brand new SPS accelerator, into a collider, and that enabled CERN to discover the W and Z particles in the 80s, and that, I think, was another trigger which made CERN a really very important place from the 80s, which has led to its success now. And then there was a supernova in around 84, which was interesting as well. 81, 84, 84 maybe. No, SN is 1987, SN 1987A. That, remember, was again something that was fantastic about science that brings this in, and discovering neutrinos, and which is again a particle physics thing, but it's linked to astronomy. So it's just fascination about things like that.
So the birth of the World Wide Web happened here at CERN. Could you tell us a little bit about it, please?
Okay, so yeah, I was here then, and I really at the very beginning. And what was interesting is I worked on IBM mainframes then, which were very different to the workstations that Tim Berners-Lee worked on. And I think clearly what he did was fantastic. But I think one of the things that strikes me about it in retrospect is that CERN treats all these things as matter-of-fact inventions. We've also invented things like touchscreens and stuff like that here that people don't know about because we don't sing our praises. Now, the web people hear about, but it really has revolutionized everything at CERN in the way that you'd expect. All of the automation that I mentioned earlier is through web interfaces. If I want to do something on the network in an experiment, I go to a web page and change something, and our automation enables that to reconfigure the routers that we have here. That in the past would have been much harder to do. So, but I think, yeah, the thing I would say most interesting about the web is that we see these developments as tools for ourselves, and then sometimes we should sing our praises more often about what we do. And if we'd done that earlier in the web, then maybe it wouldn't have been Netscape that came up with the browser that you see today. That would have been developed earlier at CERN because we didn't need it. What Tim Berners-Lee was focusing on then is the things that we did need, which were the collaborative editing. And all these things that you see in terms of Web 2 that came on afterwards, those are things that Tim was working on at CERN on the workstations that were important to us. The view-only browser that took the world by storm, we didn't develop because that was a dumbing down of the web for a long time. Maybe we should have been smarter in doing that, and then our name is famous anyway, but history would have been different if we developed the X browser rather than Netscape. That's a rambling answer.
That's really interesting. It makes me want to ask you, what other things have happened or are going on in CERN that people don't know about that you think they should know about?
Okay, so a lot in terms of, I think, okay, I'll pick one thing. There are more accelerators in hospitals than there are in particle physics labs. They deal with things in terms of proton therapy, hadron therapy, same thing really, the benefit to people in terms of health. Cryogenics is another thing that is important for that. We're developing high temperature superconducting, or not high temperature superconductors, but exploiting higher temperature superconductors to move electrical power to power our magnets. And those are things which will have spin-offs in terms of hospitals in supporting their accelerators, in shrinking the accelerators. There's an awful lot of side effects that come off into things like that. I think that superconducting cable, people are even looking at that in terms of how you could work on planes to reduce the carbon emission of planes. So that's probably a cool thing, pun intended.
Yeah, it seems very important for people that are not physics or scientific minded to understand that the projects like this that do take up a lot of resources have a huge amount of value that's not necessarily seen even in the published papers of the Higgs boson. It's amazing discoveries, but the impact and positivity that CERN has had on people's lives is vast, and we don't know it. We don't know the benefit. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think one of the things I can add to that is that people think of CERN as a physics lab. It's not. It's an engineering lab. CERN employs 2,500 people. Only 100 or so of them are physicists. CERN employs 2,000 engineers, and civil engineers, electrical engineers, computing engineers, you name it. It's an engineering lab. So you can work at CERN even if you're not a physicist.
Can I ask you a little bit about the discovery of the Higgs boson, or what's the right terminology to ask the question of? Was it identified? Obviously, Higgs proposed the existence, and it was proven at CERN recently. Is that the right terminology, maybe?
I would say the discovery.
Discovery, okay.
The discovery of the Higgs boson proves that the standard model, which includes the Higgs boson, is correct. It wasn't necessarily correct, but I think the key question now, which is why we need to go beyond what we're doing at the LHC, is the Higgs boson. Is it exactly as Peter Higgs imagined? It could be different, because there are still many things that the standard model didn't understand. So I mentioned earlier about the SPS collider discovering the W and Z particles. Then we needed the LEP collider to really study those, generate them in massive numbers, and then that came out with a theory with the result that there are only 3 generations of matter. 3 generations of families of electrons and quarks. We need to do the same now with the Higgs. We've shown it exists, but we need to study it in detail. And this is why we're proposing the Future Circular Collider. And that will be exactly like after we discover the W and Z in the SPS, we had the LEP Collider. We've discovered the Higgs in the LHC. We need the FCC to study the Higgs particle in more detail and make sure it's exactly the way that Higgs imagined it. It could be different, and there are still many things that we don't understand about the particles of the universe that we see in front of us.
And would you say that is sort of the primary concern, is a deeper understanding of the way the universe works?
Oh, absolutely. That's really what physicists we have today are. That's their raison d'être. But as I say, the raison d'être for most of the people working at CERN, if you're an engineer, is helping them do their job.
Yeah. And your face lit up when I said that, so it's clearly a major important point for you.
Yeah, no, my background is as a physicist, and I've been at CERN for nearly 40 years now in a range of jobs in the computing department, but supporting the physicists, it gives you something that feels that your job, is more than just a day-to-day activity.
Did you, when you came in to work for CERN, did you come into the computing department, or did you transition from physics to computing at some point?
So I have a PhD in experimental physics, but really much of the things that you do when you're doing a PhD or a postdoc or whatever is computing. So I had to do IBM mainframe assembler programming, and that was what led to me being employed by the IT department then. And I moved on from that to working with workstations and then databases and then networks today.
What do you think is the biggest achievement in CERN's history?
Okay, so lots of people would say the Webb or the Higgs. I would say the discovery of the WNZ, because CERN took a huge gamble in turning a brand new accelerator that had just been built in the 1970s. They shut it down for 2 or 3 years. It'd only been running for a year, and they turned it into a collider. And that led to Carlo Rubbia and Simon van der Mee's Nobel Prizes with the discovery of the WNZ. And that was what made CERN the world-class laboratory that it is today, that gamble.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the mechanics of that? So how did they discover the WNZ particles?
Well, that's really very similar to what we're doing today. To get the energy in the center of mass, you really need a collider, and that was something that we had a collider in the past, the intersecting storage rings, but they couldn't reach the energy that was needed. With the SPS 450 GeV energy, if you collided an antiproton, that gives you 900 GeV, which was enough to create the WNZ particles. And it's similar to what we have today with the LHC. It collides particles in opposite directions, and they annihilate in the center of mass, which gives you much more energy than extracting them and hitting a fixed target, which is what the SPS was designed to do.
So that's when you have two beams that they cross the beams and hit each other head on.
Yeah, that's the collider thing, and it's turning that from the SPS into just supposed to circulate the particles and send them into one that could support antiprotons as well. And then, that really was a gamble that paid off big time. So I think that was the big achievement.
So if that transition from accelerator to collider is also being proposed now for the main accelerator, is that true, or is that a different?
Okay, so that's a bit different. I mean, what we have today is something that was designed from the beginning as a collider. So there we don't have to collide protons and antiprotons in the LHC, which is an advantage because antiprotons are difficult to make. So if you're designing a collider, it's much better to design ones where the protons collide. And it doesn't matter that they're protons and not a proton and an antiproton, because it's the quarks inside that are actually colliding and annihilating each other and leading to the creation of the Higgs particles. No, what's being proposed now is a bigger accelerator that collides electrons and positrons, anti-electrons, and that is a much more cleaner way of colliding and producing a Higgs particle. The problem is that I said it's the quarks inside the protons that collide. But there are other things as well. So it's a big mess of things that come out, and you have to see the signal in the mess of the particles that come out. If you have an electron-positron collider, you can tune the energy very precisely, and you see exactly just the Higgs particle coming out or just the top particles coming out. And that's what's being proposed now, with a view to doing exactly the same as we did with LEP, which we then had a hadron collider in the tunnel. That's the idea of the SCC, that we start off with an electron-positron collider, and then after that, study the Higgs in depth. We can then put a hadron collider in the tunnel and see where things take us from there.
Can you give an estimate as to how much data is currently stored behind us?
We have at least an exabyte. I'm probably more now because the LHC is running, but we crossed the exabyte measure a few months ago, so at least an exabyte.
Congratulations. From one collision at the Hadron Collider, how much data is generated?
To be honest, I don't know in detail. It used to be 100 megabytes for one collision. That's the figure I have in mind. Whether it's still that, but it's of that order. One collision is about 100 megabytes. But that will increase in the HLHC because, as I say, they're going to increase the sensitivity of the detectors for the new colliders and add more channels, so that will increase in the future.
Are there any creative or artistic collaborations currently happening at CERN?
As a matter of fact, yeah, surprisingly. That was an initiative of a previous Director General, Rolf Dieter Hoyer. He wanted to set up something where you could invite arts to CERN to understand that, and we're sitting here in front of the noise of the computer centre, and one of the people who won one of the annual competitions of that was a sound engineer, I forget his name, and he was really fascinated by these noises. And as you walk around, you can hear the transformers. I mean, the accelerator cycles every 14 seconds, the SPS, and you can hear them going, and he was fascinated by they cycle like that. And the new Science Gateway that Fabiola, our current Director General, has championed, that I believe also has an area of local artists can exhibit in that as well. So yeah, I mean, that's another side that people don't see.
That's really nice to know about as a musician. It's cool when you see these big institutions and organisations interact with the arts. And in terms of interacting with the local community in Geneva, how would you say the relationship with CERN and the city itself is?
That's good. We reach out to local communities. There are annual meetings with the local mayors. I have to say that back when things were being built, CERN changed with LEP. Before, people wouldn't stay in the area, but LEP, when people were worried when they were building that, the impact it would have on the local community. But what people see, it's brought jobs to the area, it's brought people to the area, and I mentioned a bit about the FCC. That's a future.
Could you break down what that is?
The Future Circular Collider, our new project. The local people in the PageX and Geneva that are used to working with CERN, they're not worried about that at all, I don't think. The worries come from people in Haute-Savoie who don't see how respectful we are of the local environment, how we integrate well, how we take care of things like that. And that I think people do see in Geneva and the PageX. They're very happy that we're here.
Do you think CERN has effectively quashed the physics worries about potentially destroying the universe?
Quashed, no, because people will always believe in wacky conspiracy theories. But what CERN is it's open about what we do, and I think that is something that people do appreciate. You can come around, people can, and the Science Gateway, that was built because we couldn't support the number of visitors that we have. If you've been to CERN, you can see that we're open, and you wouldn't believe that we would dream of doing something which could destroy the universe.
No, of course not. It makes no physics sense as well, but that's
no.
It's online fun, I guess. What is it like being part of a collaboration that is based in Switzerland and France and crosses this border?
Okay, fantastically easier now than it was 30 years ago. Our host states have always been very supportive of us, providing the land and providing the facilities. But the day-to-day realities of people crossing the border are much easier now with Switzerland and the bilateral accords with the EU. So for CERN itself, the host states have always been accommodating. The increased integration across Europe has made things much easier for people to travel across the border, and even just the modern world with simple travel, EasyJet. Companies like that, it's much easier travelling to Geneva now than it was when I first became a PhD student. So I think where there are difficulties, it's more because of technologies that weren't designed to work across borders. So I mentioned the GSM technology.
GSM means?
So that's the mobile telephony services. They were designed thinking of countries themselves, or thinking that you cross a border quickly. The problem with being sited at a border is that as you travel between our sites, sometimes you're in range of a Swiss mobile telephony mast, sometimes in range of a French one, and you swap between them. So that's one of the weird complexities. But in general, our host states support what we're doing, and the changes in the European community have just made it much easier. So most people don't even notice the border. And in fact, my office is in France, and I go for a coffee in Switzerland, and I don't even think about it.
And with regard to the local population in the host states, how well would you say that CERN and the workers at CERN are integrating, and what do you think the opinion of CERN is of some of the locals in France and Switzerland?
So I think you have to distinguish there between the users and the people who are employed by CERN. So some of the users don't stay at CERN long term, and then maybe they don't speak French so much. But the CERN staff, I think they're relatively well integrated into the local community. So my kids were born here, they went to the local French schools, and most of my colleagues, that's true. And depending on where they live, a French school if they live in France, a Swiss school if they live in Switzerland. So colleagues are work like that. There were maybe worries when the LET was planned in the 70s, but as people have seen how respectful CERN has been in terms of being careful not to have an impact in terms of noise or other problems on the local population, there aren't so many worries about that. So that was very evident recently as CERN proposes this new future circular collider. I don't think there are any worries really about people who are based in around here in the PageX or in Geneva who see how we operate. The worries about this new collider are maybe more on the Haute-Savoie in France, where they worry about the new sites that will be here. But if they came to the PageX and see how the sites fit in, I don't think they would be worried.
Do you have any tips or guidance for aspiring scientists in the 21st century?
Follow what you love. I mean, if you do that, I think you're going to be happy. If you set out to come to CERN, or set out to do something just because you want to do that and it doesn't happen, you're probably going to be unhappy. Follow your nose, follow what you're interested in. I didn't imagine that I would end up running a networking outfit at CERN. But it happened, and I enjoy it because I followed what I loved in terms of doing the physics. So I think that's the best advice you can give.
That's really good advice. As such a wide international community, what languages are spoken here?
Okay, so CERN has two official languages, French and English, and it probably divides into the scientific community speaks largely English because they come from all over the world. But in terms of the actual infrastructure at CERN, that community is much more francophone because we work a lot with companies in the local area from either Geneva or from the PageX, and they will speak much more French. And similarly, when you're building a new data center, as we just have done, that's built in French, the people speak French. So the two languages are used pretty much equally at CERN, but in different communities.
What programming languages are used here?
Okay, so you should ask somebody younger about that. C++ is used a lot in the particle physics. Java we have in a lot of stuff. Python is used a lot. Ruby, Go, and after that I'm showing my age and I can probably shut up.
Tony, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. It's been really nice meeting you and learning more about the data center here at CERN.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much.